All right, should be live streaming to YouTube. Let me check real quick. All right, should be live streaming to YouTube. Let me check real quick. Think we're good.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, that is a little feedback here. Let's review the guidelines for our meeting. I'm going to hang on 1 second. Sound like the TA announcer at Guaranteed Rate Field. Although Gene Honda has a better voice than I do. Think it works, Jerry? Is that better? Excellent. Thank you. Let's try again. Good morning to all attending the RTA's meeting of the Board of Directors. Let's review our guidelines for this morning. For the members who are here in person, first of all, thank you as always. Please turn on your microphones when you wish to speak and off when you are done so that we limit the microphones that are on at any one given time. And I will call on those with questions or comments for those who are here in the room. For those calling in remotely, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise, which will impair the recording by the secretary. And when you have a question or comment, raise your virtual hand. You've gotten very good at that over the last couple of years. And the board secretary will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When she calls on you, try to remember to lower your hand to avoid later confusion and unmute yourself before speaking. With that said, I will now officially call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority to order, and everyone in person, let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Good morning. Director Delcio.
Here.
Director Carey.
Here.
Director Colson.
Here.
Director Fuentes.
Here.
Director Gathing.
Here.
Director Gorman.
Here.
Director Groven.
Here.
Director Holt.
Here.
Director Cattell.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Here.
Director Melvin. Director Pang.
Here.
Director Ross.
Here.
And Director Sager. And Chairman Dillard.
Present.
We have 13 present and 2 absent.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting held on May 18th of 2023. Any corrections or comments on those as they were sent to you? If not, how about a motion and a second that we approve the minutes? Motion by Director Fuentes, seconded by Director Carey. Madam Secretary, please take the roll on the minutes from last time.
Director Delcio.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gathing.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cattell.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin. Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Yes.
And Director Sager is out, and then Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
13 ayes.
Item 3 is approved. Item 4 is the public comment segment of our meeting. Any comments received by email will now be read into the record by the board secretary. Joey, you have any of those?
We don't, nothing was submitted.
Excellent. So we're here for live testimony, and we have our old friends or our former friends or our current friends, Garland and Heather Armstrong are here, and it's good to have you back, Garland. How are you?
Thank you, Chairman Darrell. It's been 2 years since we left in May of 2021 from the Chicagoland area, Des Plaines, heading to Des Moines, Iowa. So we're glad to be back in the Chicagoland area. We're now staying at the Mainstay Hotel and Suites in Schaumburg, Illinois. And we're glad to be back, and it's bittersweet, emotional to see everybody, new staff and current ones here. Yesterday, me and my wife at the CMAP, we was talking about the park thing, but my biggest concern is what's going to be happening in 2026. I think y'all should have the business and the corporate see the reality of this along with the federal and the state lawmakers because of what's going to be happening. And I think what's happening too in other states and cities too, they're going to do the same. It's going to be the same thing too, since I think y'all need to be blended together on this to get ready, because God forbids when 2026 comes, it's going to be a lot of thunderous protests over this, and it's going to be a lot of panic. So I want y'all to be well prepared for this, and make sure to keep your ears and eyes open, and remind everyone that only time will come, and then they're not well prepared. You better be, or otherwise you're going to see what I mean, the reality of it. So they need to wake up and see it firsthand, up close. So I'll be glad to have any questions or comments from y'all since while we're here.
Thank you. That is our plan. That's what we're working on every day. And anybody you see, Garland or Heather, please, especially local officials, tell them transit's the answer. It's critical. Any questions or comments? If not, thank you. It's great to have you back home.
Thanks.
You. Item 5.
Hold on.
Yep. Hey, Heather. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Heather Armstrong. And so this future, so you guys don't fall off the cliff in 26. I think you guys need what's the most standard taxes would be like corporate tax, like the anybody making over 200,000, and also like hotel taxes. They should be going towards transit, not this crazy sales tax, which people go, because the main problem is they'll go outside the area where if you live, let's say if you live like near like let's say you live here in Chicago, you know how easy it is to get into Indiana, or like to like outside of the RTA area. The best ones is property taxes, corporate tax, and billionaire taxes, because those people those are more stable taxes than the sales, getting money from the sales tax. Because I know, oh yeah, I forgot another one, hotel taxes too. So those are more better option than the sales tax, along with the sales taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Got it. I appreciate your input very much. Item 5, Leanne, it's your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members and our guests, and thanks specifically to Heather and and Garland, who have returned. I saw them also yesterday when I was at the CMAP board meeting. So it's great to see them back and making the rounds and sort of sharing us their thoughts and insights. And really their commitment to ensuring accessibility across our transit system. I think if we ever are looking for ambassadors, there's two great ones right there. Since last we met, it's been a pretty busy month, engaging, I think, many of our familiar, but also many new audiences around the region, as we really continue working on implementation of the strategic plan. I was most recently at UITP Global Public Transportation Summit in Spain with the CTA President Dorval Carter, as well as the FTA Administrator and several other peer agencies across the US at this big international conference. It was exciting, inspiring, showing us the challenges and the work we have to do, but it was kind of great to be back and sort of meeting with peers in a big conference like that. There was a lot of learnings for all of us to take away from that conference. And so I think it was very relevant and very timely for all of us to be there. Prior to that, a little closer to home though, I was in DC with the chairman and the 3 service boards, their executive directors and board members. We were jokingly referring to it as getting the band back together. We haven't toured in Washington, DC since pre-pandemic. So we were all back together making the rounds with our Illinois delegation. Again, it was also great to connect with them and bring them up to speed, even though we've been talking to staff, but meeting face to face and talking to them about the challenges that we're facing with the transit system, that we're not alone, that our fiscal cliff is a tad further out than some of our peers around the country. But it was a great opportunity for us to connect with our delegation. And I think for all 4 agencies to be back together, and we sort of jokingly refer to it as getting the band back together, but that time together, you know, walking the halls, there's a lot of downtime where you're also solving the rest of the problems that we have to deal with and working out how we can all continue to improve the transit system. So I think it was a really good opportunity for us. You'll get a more thorough briefing on that during the board meeting when we talk about give you an update on the legislative activities. Even closer to home, we have continued our tour. This is my band theme for the day. Continuing the tour of the regional councils and the local governments, talking with them about the same issues, the status of transit, the strategic plan, and the looming fiscal crisis. We were most specifically at the annual meeting of McHenry County, where I talked to their council of governments with Director Saga. Director Ross actually ended up pinch hitting for me, presenting the same information at the Will County Governmental League. So I appreciate that. And following today's board meeting, the chairman's going to be the featured guest speaker at a lunch hosted by the Lincoln Forum to discuss the state of transit. And that audience really asking them to engage with us as we talk about sort of how do we fix these, address these challenges. CMAP, on the CMAP front, they're also continuing to put together their plan of action for regional transit, or as they're referring to it as PART. Our staff continues to follow that process. They will issue a series of white papers over the summer before they release recommendations later this fall, and we'll keep you posted as that progresses. I also just want to take a moment to recognize our finance team. The GFOA again has awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting to the RTA for its annual comprehensive financial report for 2020. So that's actually the 28th consecutive year that they've received that. So that's high honors for that group and the work that they continue to do. So congrats to them. So next slide, please. So 5310 federal funding program, which is formerly called the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program, is a federal program that's really designed to improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities by removing barriers to transportation services and expanding mobility options across the country. So earlier this year, we held our call for projects. We received 15 applications. We reviewed them for eligibility under the federal program and scored them with a project selection team that was made up of IDOT, CMAP, Easter Seals Group, and the RTA. The total funding available for FY 2022 and 23 is just over 13.5 million. And we welcome comments from the public on these program or projects that are on our website through August 8. And we'll present that recommended program of projects to you for approval and adoption. The intention is at the September meeting. So next slide, please. We are in June, and this year is our second year of doing what we call Transportation Tuesdays. So far, we've held 2 of the 4 scheduled Tuesday webinars, both attracting more than 100 attendees for each of those. And the first one we heard directly from the service boards about their post-COVID work, the service adaptations during, during that period to now, to share that with the public and many of our stakeholders and advocates about the work that they've been doing and already have underway. The second one, which was held just yesterday, no, what day is it? Thursday, just Tuesday, 2 days ago, was about the concept of mobility hubs in planning. So thinking about how do we create these nodes across multimodal uses that is advantageous to public transportation, but also sort of giving people better mobility options in those core nodes. There's 2 more seminars scheduled this month. After we do each one of those, we record them and we post them on our website. And we also put out a blog associated with the material that was discussed. There's 2 more coming. They're free, they're virtual sessions. They run from noon to 1. They cover sort of broad key topics in our transportation agenda, specifically connected to our strategic plan, and transit is the answer. The remaining 2 are going to talk about transit and freight, how transit and freight traffic interact. And then an explainer on capital strategy, new capital metrics, and sort of the available data around those visual resources that we're developing. So as I mentioned, participation is free. If you know or you want to join any of those, you do have to actually register, so you'll have the link for that. And we feature that also in our website so people can sign up and join us. Okay, next slide, please. So today we will begin with a presentation on the semi-annual project management oversight, or the PMO report. Then there'll be an update on the strategic plan implementation, as I mentioned. Then we'll ask for some votes on the amendments to the 2023-27 capital program and some related changes to the ICE funded projects. Then we're going to have a presentation and a vote on the 2022 annual comprehensive financial report as well. And the audit information. And then finally, we'll ask for your vote on 2 contract amendments. One is for the integrated and on-demand design services associated with this implementation and execution on the strategic plan and all the education associated with that. And then the second one is for the enterprise resource planning work, or our ERP system, which is essentially our financial system, our HR system, et cetera, et cetera. So support and software and the related services associated with that. And then we'll conclude with hopefully approval of some travel expenses. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions for Leanne? Yes, Director Lewis, good morning.
Staff and the boards from the other transit agencies went to DC. Was that just a couple of?
It was the chairs of the agency. So Chairman Dillard was with us. And actually there was no board members from CTA, sort of a collection. So, but that was the plan.
Yeah, no, we had Dorval was there.
Dorval, he was there. Yeah, Dorval and their Director of Government Affairs.
And Metro was
Federal stuff.
Derwinski, Sherwin Brown, and Janice was there too, Janice Thomas. And then Pace had both Melinda as
and
well as
Rick Kwasniewski.
Mayor
chairman.
Kwasniewski as the chair. It was good. It's really surprising. It shouldn't be, but I think each of the congressional delegations, their eyes open up when we all walk in together and we're all, in harmony, which is good. They like to see that. And I will tell you, the members of Congress, highly engaged, very, very up to date on what we're doing, and our congressional delegation is a massive strength to Illinois. It's why we always get more transportation monies back than most states. We're a net exporter of money, but on the transportation side, Chicago over a 40-year period has been a winner, and that credit goes to our congressional delegation, which is top notch. So I really thank them for their time. and it's exhausting to do.
You get your steps in.
To do 2 straight days of constant meetings in DC, but productive, I hope. Item 6A is a presentation on the PMO, as Leanne said. Violet Gunka Gurgle is here to present the report. Hi, Violet.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Violet Gunka, and I am the Division Manager for Project Management Oversight and Compliance. Today, I will present the current semi-annual report on Project Management Oversight, or PMO. Next slide, please. RTA implements the PMO program pursuant to Section 2.01B of the RTA Act. RTA is required to oversee the Service Board's capital programs and expenditures. PMO is part of RTA's fulfillment of this requirement. The focus of the PMO program is implementation, delivery, and completion of active projects. It includes oversight of all state-funded transit projects regardless of budget and all other projects with budgets of 10 million or more regardless of funding source. Through this program, we work with the RTA capital team and the service boards to ensure that capital funding is spent efficiently and effectively. RTA and the service boards have been working on improving the transparency of the capital program. The information in the semi-annual PMO report provides details on current projects in the region. The report was provided to you with the board materials, and it will be published on the RTA website following the board meeting. Also, updated PMO project information is available on the RTA's Mapping and Statistics website, also referred to as RTAMS. Next slide, please. The majority of current state projects are funded by the $2.6 billion Rebuild Illinois State Bond Program and by $227 million in ongoing annual gas tax revenue available for capital projects, also referred to as PAYGO. At this time, I would like to provide some background on the PMO process. First, the service boards complete and submit the grant applications for the Rebuild Illinois and PAYGO funding that are reviewed and approved by RTA and IDOT. After the grant funds are awarded, the service boards finish up their project planning and complete the procurement process for the project. Once the procurement process is completed at the service board level, the RTA concurs on the procurements and a notice to proceed is issued. The RTA PMO process starts once there is an executed agreement with the contractor and project scope activities have commenced. From this point, the PMO considers the project to be active. The PMO team monitors the scope, schedule, and budget against the baseline approved in the executed contract documents. All active PMO projects are included in the PMO report. A project exits the PMO process once it reaches substantial completion. At this time, there are many more Rebuild Illinois and PAYGO projects in the procurement process at the service boards, but they are not yet included in the PMO report. To summarize, RTA PMO projects are a subset of the capital program, and the PMO report provides a snapshot in time of the currently active PMO projects. Next slide, please. This PMO report includes 82 active state-funded projects that have a total budget of over $3.6 billion, of which $2.6 billion is state funding. The 82 active state-funded projects in the report also include 2 projects that are funded with prior year's programs, as the service boards are still wrapping up some older projects and using up any remaining older funds. The report also includes 27 projects with budgets of 10 million or more funded with mostly federal dollars and other local funds. In total, the report details 109 projects which show a capital investment of over $7.6 billion into the RTA region's transit system. This funding includes what has already been expanded and what is obligated for these projects. Some of them span over multiple years. Next slide, please. All of the $2.6 billion in Rebuild Illinois State Bond funding has been awarded to the service boards. As of May, $437 million, or 17% of the total Rebuild Illinois funding has been expanded. Similarly, $908 million of PAYGO funding has been awarded to CTA, Metra, and PACE. At this time, over $430 million, or 47% of the total PAYGO funding has been expanded. Next slide, please. To increase transparency on timelines for project implementation, 2 types of schedules are tracked in the PMO report. The preliminary schedule is submitted by the service boards with the grant application, and it includes internal service board activities such as final planning, the procurement of a contractor for the project, as well as the actual project implementation. This schedule provides a general projection of when the project will be completed, and it tracks the project all the way through closeout. As shown on the pie chart on the left side of the slide, we can see that 71% of projects are behind the preliminary schedule. This means that the final planning activities, procurements, and project implementation are taking longer than the service boards anticipated when the grant applications were submitted. The project implementation schedule starts once the notice to proceed has been issued to the contractor, and it tracks how the contractor is performing against the schedule in the executed contract documents. This schedule can be changed if there are unforeseen conditions or scope changes. The schedule revisions are approved by the service boards, and once approved, the project implementation is tracked against the revised schedule. The PMO team tracks the project under this schedule through the substantial completion. On the pie chart shown on the right side of the slide, we can see that 29% of projects are behind their implementation schedule, which means that the contractor has encountered delays during project execution. In summary, there are more project delays when we look at the preliminary schedule due to greater uncertainty regarding project activities at the time of grant application. Once the projects move into the project implementation phase, the contractor is held accountable, the project activities are fully defined, and schedules are adhered to on most projects. RTA continues to encourage the service boards to have shovel-ready projects with more refined schedules when applying for grant funding. Next slide, please. Now we will highlight some of the active state-funded projects. CTA recently awarded a construction contract for the Racine Station and Morgan Substation project. The Racine Station work is focused on making the station ADA accessible, as well as adding other customer-facing improvements. As part of this project, the main entrance at Racine Street will be upgraded to add an elevator. At the auxiliary west entrance at Loomis Street, the platform access ramp will be rebuilt. Additional customer-facing improvements include updated paint and flooring finishes, new guardrails, energy-efficient LED lighting fixtures, security cameras, wayfinding signage, and farebox equipment. The second part of the project includes a new substation at Morgan. Overall, the scope of work includes building the substation structure, as well as design and construction of traction power conversion and distribution equipment and cable connections to the existing track. Redundant ComEd utility sources will be required. Additional traction power upgrades will also be implemented at the Hermitage substation to replace equipment that is nearing the end of its useful life. The budget for this project is $97 million, all of which comes from Rebuild Illinois funds. The design for this project has already been completed, and the notice to proceed for construction has been issued in May. Currently, the contractor is working on the required submittals and getting ready to mobilize for field work. The planned completion for this project is October 2025. Next slide, please. Metra is advancing many of the rolling stock projects, including locomotive and rail car rehabilitation, the purchase of remanufactured locomotives, and the procurement of new rail cars. Metra has a very successful in-house rehabilitation program for both rail cars and locomotives. These programs allow Metra to be more cost-effective and more expedient than outsourcing the work, and it also helps to keep jobs in the communities that Metra serves. In their most recent fact book, Metra highlighted a total cost savings of $154.5 million for the in-house rehab program versus outsourcing. These programs are ongoing and use a variety of funding sources. Recently, Metra took delivery of 4 remanufactured locomotives, one of which you can see on this slide. These locomotives are part of a base order for 15 remanufactured locomotives. The remaining 11 are in various stages of production and testing and are expected to be delivered by May 2024. The budget for this project is $185 million, with $139 million coming from Rebuild Illinois bonds and $46 million in federal funds. Metra is also in the final stages of design for the new rail cars. The final design review is currently ongoing and is expected to be completed in August. The first car is expected to be delivered to Metra in 2024. The budget for this project is $551 million, with $364 million coming from Rebuild Illinois, and the rest is a combination of PAYGO, RTA bonds, and FTA funds. The RTA PMO and capital teams had an opportunity to visit Metro's 47th Street shop in May to check on the status of these important projects. We observed and learned about the work performed during the rail car and locomotive rehabilitation process. We were able to see and walk through the newly delivered locomotive as well as the mock-up for the new rail cars. Next slide, please. I'll just. I'll just keep going. Maybe it'll come up. So next project highlight will be for PACE. PACE had made significant progress on the construction of their South Campus in Markham. The project includes the construction of a new acceptance facility, an office building, as well as associated site work and a new bus operator training course. The purpose of this project is to consolidate certain operational functions into one location. The acceptance facility will replace the existing facility in South Holland and include body repair work, mechanic training, farebox and radio repair, sign and shelter shops. The office building will hold PACE's customer relations department, offices for other support staff, training, and conference rooms. It will also hold central dispatching, safety, operator training, and an IT secondary data center. The budget for this project is $37 million, with $27.1 million coming from prior year's state programs, $7.1 million from PAYGO, and the remaining funds are a combination of RTA bonds, FTA, and PACE funds. Work is ongoing at the acceptance facility with precast wall installation. The office building work includes roofing, electrical installation, and metal framing. The construction is scheduled to be completed in October of 2023. The projects highlighted here today, as well as all projects detailed in the PMO report, show an investment of $7.6 billion into the region's transit system. The Rebuild Illinois and PAYGO funds provided a helpful infusion of funding into the capital program and helped expedite overdue repair and replacement projects to move the system toward a state of good repair. However, it is not enough to address the long-term project backlog. The RTA strategic plan, Transit is the Answer, highlights the need for an annual investment of $3.5 billion over the next 10 years. The current infrastructure investments detailed in the PMO report are part of the progress made to bring our region's transit system one step closer to the vision outlined in the strategic plan of safe, reliable, accessible public transportation that connects people to opportunity, advances equity, and combats climate change. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Violet. Any questions or comments, Director Borman?
Thank you, Val. That was a very good presentation and, that helped fill a lot of gaps and questions that I had, especially when we were covering our meeting. So thank you for that. But I'm just curious, who's our PMO that's overseeing these projects?
You mean the contractors?
Yes.
We have a pool of 4 contractors. It's Globetrotters, V3, GSG, who's a minority firm, and Transmart is also a 100% minority firm. We use a pool because they also have contracts with the service boards, so there's no conflict of interest. They have to confirm there's no conflict before we assign them to a project.
So that's why they have the multiple contractors. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Director Lewis.
Thank you, Violet. Again, that was a very good report. You touched on a point just a second ago. I thought in the past on the PMO report, we combined our diverse spend goals and commitments with that report. Am I correct, Leanne, in remembering that? I thought Nadine would do the two at the same time. And so I just wondered if we are looking at our commitment to diverse spend when we look at the PMO, or those separate and distinct functions.
Sort of both. I mean, Violet tracks it in the projects, and these are all service board projects, so we're not directly responsible for it. We just check against what their criteria and their goals are. On the separate side, we track our projects against, the federal requirements and our DBE goal as well on all the projects that we do. But we don't do capital projects really here at RTA. So ours are more consulting-based contracts.
Is there a standard? I mean, I understand that we don't control the spend, but I thought we took a look at what level of DBE spend there might be in other service areas just to try and get some gauge on it. Was this not the area that we would do it?
No, I think when in the past we've asked those questions around the budget time associated with the budget and their capital program submittals historically. There's no, we don't actually do a sort of a rolled up regional DBE just because it's such a different kind of mix across the three service boards. And there's very specific reporting requirements that each of them directly have that they have to report to the federal government on. But we can gather their, I mean, because we gather this information and use it with legislative leaders and others as we're talking to them. So we can gather that information too.
It might be interesting just to see where we stand and how we're making progress over time. I wouldn't make a big issue out of it, but just something to look at. And again, I guess it might be a jawboning our part to go to some of the service agencies, but just to make sure they're doing a good job in that arena. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Violet? If not, thank you very much. Item 6B is an update on the Transit is the Answer strategic plan. And I see Anthony Safali coming up, and I think Doug Anderson is also going to present. Gentlemen, good morning.
Sorry. Morning. Thank you, Chairman Dillard and members of the board for having me here today to provide an update on Transit is the Answer and the implementation. Next slide, please. My name is Anthony Safali. I'm a principal in the government affairs group here. Just want to remind you that this new format is meant to keep you informed of the ways the agency is implementing Transit is the Answer. For this month, I will give a legislative update, and I'm going to pass it over to Doug for the finance side of things. Next slide, please. First, a few high-level items from Springfield's session. I spent a lot of time down there this spring. So I just want to highlight what happened there, and then we're going to go into detail on some of the omnibus items next. The legislative session concluded in late May with the passage of state fiscal year 2024 budget. The $50.6 billion spending plan includes funding for transit operations at levels consistent with previous years. The 24 budget saw a $713,000 increase to the state's ADA paratransit appropriation, which was previously appropriated at $8.4 million, and a $1.493 million increase in the state reimbursement for providing free and reduced fares. Previously, that was $17.5 million. Governor Pritzker has signed both the budget and the budget implementation bill into law. As I said, I'll touch on the transit omnibus proposal in the next slide, but I do in the details there. But I do want to note that it extended the fare box recovery ratio relief that we are currently experiencing for 2024 and 2025. As we stated in Transit is the Answer, we're committed to recovery ratio reform, and we feel that this 2-year extension as granted gives transit the time to determine what that reform looks like in the context of new revenues. I will also add here that while the recovery ratio relief was a priority for the RTA this session, and it required significant legislative contributions, extending the waiver does not ameliorate the problem. The fiscal cliff, as we anticipate, begins in FY26, and ongoing funding will be needed to avert that. Two other items of note that passed this session. Legislators passed a bill mandating that employers with more than 50 employees within 1 mile of fixed route transit service within the RTA service area provide the federal pre-tax transit benefit program. To facilitate this process, the RTA will create a searchable map for employers to see if they fall within this boundary. Legislators also passed a revision to the Ride Free program administered by the RTA, changing the renewal cycle from 2 years to 5 years, provided residency requirements are met by applicants. None of these have been signed by the governor, but we anticipate that will happen later in summer. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the Transit Omnibus Bill included an extension of the current recovery ratio waiver for FY24 and 25. The Omnibus included a number of other initiatives, including new fare programs, as well as the authority to suspend fare cards for repeat offenders for the service boards. First, I'm going to highlight the new fare programs, which include a program for victims of domestic violence that includes the distribution of $500,000 in fare cards, $20 each, to victims of domestic violence through the advocacy group, The Network, that will be administered by the RTA. The Network, an organization that advocates for and provides resources to victims of domestic violence, will participate in the RTA's Citizen Advisory Board and develop a report on the usage of the fare cards. Additionally, CTA will provide rides to participants of the One Summer Chicago program, and this is estimated to be approximately $2 million. Part of the whole fare package, RTA will complete a study of free and reduced fares in the region to be completed by July 2024. The omnibus also includes a zero emission mandate, which would bar the service boards from purchasing any diesel buses beginning in July 2026. The language includes exceptions for certain economic and infrastructure conditions, such as buses not being available and garages not being equipped with necessary charging infrastructure. For context, this date aligns with both CTA and PACE's goals and zero emissions commitments. The omnibus also gives the service boards the authority to put in place a process to suspend fare cards for repeat offenders on the system. And Metro and PACE will create jobs programs that provide internships and employment opportunities to youth. Finally, as part of the whole recovery ratio element, the RTA will certify that the service boards publicly post data on a monthly basis around service reliability, workforce, and safety. And that's for FY24 and 25 with the recovery ratio. As we look ahead, the General Assembly has already set dates for veto session. It will take place over 2 weeks from October 24th to 26th and November 7th through 9th. In the meantime, RTA staff will continue to conduct outreach to legislators on transit is the answer and focus on legislative leaders, committee chairs in both chambers and parties, as well as key transportation stakeholders. Next slide, please. Now on to the federal side of things. As Leanne mentioned earlier, the federal level last month, Chairman Dillard and Leanne led a group of leaders from CTA, Metro, and PACE with meetings with the Chicago area congressional delegation on Capitol Hill. This group discussed the projected operating shortfall and a potential role for the federal government in closing the budget gap to prevent further increases in service cuts across the region. CTA, Metro, and PACE executives also updated members on transit's continued recovery and the latest ridership trends. The response was positive as representatives are eager to work with us to support transit in their districts across the region, although the likelihood of new federal operating assistance under the current Congress is low. Shortly after DC, congressional leaders in the White House reached an agreement on legislation to suspend the debt limit and cut spending. The agreement did establish budgetary caps on defense and non-defense spending for 2024 and 2025, and this includes a cap on public transit spending. Specific funding levels still need to be agreed upon through the appropriations process, but we expect 24 levels will, for key transit formula and discretionary grant programs will remain close to flat for 2020 compared to 2023. And finally, next slide, local level. RTA staff continue to assist Chairman Dillard in his role as co-chair of Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's Transportation Subcommittee on the new mayor's transition team. The committee completed a final draft of the transportation portion of the report, which is being reviewed by the mayor's transition team and wrapped up into the overall report, which is due out June 30th. The latest draft features many of RTA's priorities, like urging the mayor to be a champion for public transit and advocate for new ongoing funding in Springfield and Washington. Pass it over to Doug now for the finance side.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. Doug Anderson, Manager of Budgets and Analysis. For information only this month, I will cover our standard slides for service board financial results through April, and will also provide responses to questions raised by the board last month regarding the finance dashboard and relief funding drawdowns. Next slide, please. The operating deficit results through April continue to be very favorable to budget for each service board and the region as a whole. As a reminder, the operating deficit metric accounts for the combined performance of the service board's system-generated revenue and operating expenses. In addition to the percent variance shown by the gray bars, we have added the dollar amounts of the budgeted and actual operating deficits at the bottom of this slide. These deficits represent the funding requirement, that is, the amount of funding the service board stated that they would require with their budgets versus what has actually transpired through April. An actual result which is less negative than budgeted represents a favorable variance, which is currently the case for each service board and the ADA paratransit budget. While combined year-to-date operating expenses were still very favorable to budget due primarily to unfilled positions, there was some moderation in the percent variance for April as the service boards continue to work hard on recruiting. Next slide, please. Since last month's update, the service boards have requisitioned an additional $41 million in relief funding. And as a region, we have now drawn down 48% of the $3.5 billion total. We still anticipate that federal relief funds will begin to exhaust around the end of 2025. In response to Director Lewis's question last month on why PACE is drawing at a faster rate, here is the reason for that. When the COVID relief funding was allocated by the RTA, the general consensus was for the service boards to draw down relief funding as needed for eligible expenses to the extent that those expenses could not be covered by system-generated revenue and RTA funding. In other words, a conservative approach to only break even, thus maximizing the longevity of the relief funding. However, the relief funding ordinances also allowed for drawdowns as permitted by the FTA. And the FTA later issued guidance allowing requisitions for eligible expenses to the extent that they are not covered by system-generated revenue only, effectively ignoring local funding. PACE pursued this revised approach, which is why the chart shows a faster PACE drawdown rate, while CTA and Metra have maintained the original only draw when needed process, seeming to lag behind PACE. Neither approach is incorrect, but this disparity in drawdown rates will be a topic of discussion with the CFOs at our 2024 budget kickoff meeting next week. Related to this important issue, we need some more time to work on the chairman's request to examine how and how quickly our peer regions are drawing their relief funding. A long lag in the NTD data in this area means that data on relief funding draws are currently only available through the end of 2021, which is of limited value. So we are instead reaching out individually to our peer region CFOs to get more recent drawdown figures and confirm what approach each is using. Next slide, please. Finally, in response to board feedback last month, we worked with Karen Allen and Hirsch Singh of the planning staff to make some modifications to the finance dashboard, specifically to add the actual results to each metric on the year-to-date tabs. This should provide improved context for the percent variances. The finance dashboard remains available on the RTA website for a higher level of detail on the latest service board financial results, along with the state of transit dashboard presented last month. That concludes our presentation on the strategic plan implementation for this month. Anthony and I would be happy to answer any questions the board may have. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Questions or comments? Director Holt.
Doug, could we go back to the slide real quick with the drawdown? Thank you. So with respect to PACE and your comment about the formula that they're using to draw down, I want to make sure I understood this properly. Is the implication of what you said that they are drawing down more than they need to reach a balanced budget?
That's correct. And when the relief funding was first implemented, the understanding was you could only break even. It was later guidance from the FTA that allowed you to essentially overdraw that funding and hold it in reserve, and then expend it as needed in the future. PACE is taking that approach.
Okay. And so I guess my follow-up question is that are those dollars being spent or are they being held in reserve?
We're probably going to modify this chart to show what has been utilized of that 134 million that PACE has drawn, because the slide is a bit misleading because they're using those different methods of drawdown.
I think my concern is that has implications for one to understand, because it has implications for when PACE is, reaches the cliff versus when CTA and Metra do. And I want to confirm whether or not they're holding those dollars in reserve for future need, or whether they're spending them on additional expenses that they don't need to break even.
No, they're holding them in reserve. And in the 2023 adopted budget, which was adopted in December, you'll see we have to track on there now prior year positive budget variance, which is essentially relief funding held in reserve, and show how it will be utilized for PACE moving forward.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Can I just add that that's, as Doug said, it's all part of the budget conversation. So where is everything sort of playing out over time and looking at those numbers? But that kind of approach actually is helping on the federal side of things, because I think you may have followed in the media that there was, with the debt ceiling, there was talk of rescissions, and we were fine in our region because we have obligated all the money, but at some level there was even some conversations about could they come back and claw back even obligators money, unspent money, which is sort of that next level up. And we weren't necessarily concerned about that, but that starts, so there's all these sort of different competing approaches, if you will, and challenges. So sort of strategizing the best way for us to sort of utilize and those dollars is still an ongoing conversation as part of our budget.
And fortunately, in the debt ceiling bill, transit's exempt, so they cannot claw back any of our money, because I know that was a worry of, of a lot of people,
Yeah,
not
we
only
were
in Chicago,
personally
but other
fine.
cities.
Because we had obligated all our monies, but there was conversation, but then they actually sort of took transit monies out of the mix in terms of what was on the table for rescission and cuts.
Director Carey.
Maybe Doug, you answered this for Director Holt and I missed it, but why, so PACE is holding it in reserve.
Correct.
And why would they do that? I mean, if they were worried about clawing back, okay, understood, but that's not an issue. Do we know why they're doing that, or is that what you're going to get into in the budget discussions?
Well, we will talk about that with the CFOs next week, but essentially they're holding it because the sales tax is so strong right now that they're able to break even using the sales tax only. Now, as expenses continue to grow, they will eventually need that relief funding, and they've programmed that in the budget and plan, at least a projection of what they'll need.
Okay, and I'm just being dense, I think. Then why, if they don't need it, why are they drawing it down and holding it in reserve? What? Just so they've got it. Okay. So it might go away, or?
As we said, I mean, it's probably not, but that's been,
Okay,
and
if
that's,
if that's why.
yeah, and I think that's part of the conversation, as Doug said, about the ongoing discussions through this year's budget about what are their individual strategies and the collective regional strategy on doing this going forward as we look at the looming cliff
Okay.
and continued recovery, all of the uncertainty and different changes in the market, in terms of sales tax, all those things. So it's all, it's part of the chess game that we're sort of playing. Maybe it's more of a jigsaw puzzle. How do we put all these pieces together? So, yeah.
All right,
ongoing
well, it'll be
conversation.
interesting to hear, because CTA and Metro are not taking that approach. So I think we'd all be interested in understanding that a little bit better. I know I would, what their thinking is. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, Anthony, thank you for all your time in Springfield. It's a lot of fun down there. And thank you both very much. Thanks, Doug. Item 7A is the amendment of the 2023 to 2027 capital program and changes to ICE funded projects. And Brian, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm Brian Lowenberg, Manager Capital Programs, and I'm here to request your approval of two ordinances. First, the amendment to the 2023 to 2027 capital program, and second, changes to the ICE program. Next slide, please. Let's review the capital program amendment first. The funding for the 2023 to 2027 capital program includes changes to the approved funding and projects for CTA, Metra, and PACE. The overall program is increasing by $7 million, all of which is new funding. CTA's program is increasing by $860,000 from additional ICE funds being programmed. Metra's program increases by $700,000, again from additional ICE funds, and PACE's program increases by $5.8 million, which includes new ICE funds, new federal grants, and a deduction of $240,000 from PACE's federal formula funds to match 2023 actuals. As a reminder, CTA and Metra adjusted their federal formula allocations to actuals last month. Details on all revenue and project changes can be found in the memo and schedules in your board packet. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at some of the projects PACE is adding as a result of receiving federal transit infrastructure grants. PACE received funds for 4 projects: the purchase of electric buses, $1.9 million, the purchase of electric paratransit vehicles, $1 million, transit signal priority, $1.7 million, and the Bolingbrook Park and Ride, $1.2 million. Let's take a minute to look at the electric bus project in a bit more detail. You'll continue to see a major focus of the capital program on bus electrification. The service boards and RTA are working on obtaining the funding needed to meet the region's goal of having a fully electric bus network by 2040. This is a big effort, and we wanted to share some early cost estimates of fleet electrification. Today, let's look at one aspect of this electrification, specifically the cost of purchasing a new fleet of buses to replace the current fleet. Other significant costs to electrification include required infrastructure and garage improvements. The service boards and RTA continue to work on detailed estimates for that aspect of electrification, and we plan to share more details about the cost of infrastructure in future meetings. Today's estimate is based on 2023 pricing, which is estimated at 1.2 million per bus. The future price per electric bus is somewhat uncertain. Costs could continue to rise with inflation, but as more competition and demand are generated for electric buses, prices could stabilize or fall. We have estimated the region will need approximately 2,500 new buses. And again, there's some uncertainty about the exact number as fleet needs could change over the next 17 years. Based on this data, we get an early estimate of around $3 billion for electrification of the fleet in 2023 pricing. To that end, the region will continue to advocate for funding to meet the goal of fully electrifying by 2040. Next slide, please. Our second ordinance is for changes to the ICE program. In today's actions, we are increasing ICE funds for each service board based on 2022 sales tax receipts. I wanted to take a few minutes to give a short lesson on ICE, or Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement Funds. The ICE program was established in 2008 with a requirement spelled out in the RTA Act. ICE funding is a set aside of sales tax receipts coming to RTA that are to be used for projects that enhance the coordination and integration of public transportation and develop and implement innovations to improve the quality and delivery of public transportation. Service boards can program the funds to capital or operating projects, and all projects must be board approved. Next slide, please. So as noted, the board approves all projects as well as funding amounts in the ICE program. Each year, as part of the budget call, ICE funds are allocated based on estimated sales tax receipts. Then projects are proposed, vetted, and brought to the board for approval. In addition, the ICE program states that funds should be spent within 2 years of commencement of the projects, with the allowance for 1-year extensions by board approval. We bring ICE extensions to the board in March and September. Lastly, we bring all changes in budgets or projects to the board along with the quarterly amendments. As noted, our action today is programming additional ICE funds based on actual sales tax receipts in 2022. Starting with the 2025 budget, we will program ICE funds based on actual sales tax receipts rather than estimates, so that this true up to actuals will not be needed in the future. With these additional funds programmed today, CTA is adding $860,000 for intelligent vehicle network equipment that supports the bus tracker program. Metra is programming $700,000 for station displays, and PACE is programmed $230,000 for transit signal priority. Next slide, please. To conclude, we're requesting adoption of the following ordinances: approval to the amendment of the 2023 to 2027 capital program, and approval to changes of the ICE program. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we're seeking your approval of these 2 ordinances.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions here?
Quick comment.
Yes, Director Gorman.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And I guess that's where my initial question was with Violet about the PMO and who oversees, these projects. But to support additional projects, equipment and reaching goals, that's great. And, I'm all supportive of it. My issue is not an issue, but I guess a statement is that the PMO, how they hold, and this isn't a question to you, how they hold, it's more the companies responsible for these projects to make sure no task orders are coming before. So I appreciate your presentation to show that we are just, approving additional projects, equipment, and reaching goals. Thank you.
Thanks, Director. If there's no other questions or comments, how about a motion and a second that we approve his report? Director Ross moves we approve, seconded by Director Groven. And with that, Joey, you take a roll call, please.
Director Indulcio?
Aye.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Aye.
Director Gorman?
Aye.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis? Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
and Chairman Dillard?
Aye.
14 ayes.
Thank you. And item 7A is approved. The next 2 items can be covered in one presentation, but will take two separate votes. Item 7B is an ordinance approving the combining financial report and certifying compliance with the RTA Act recovery ratio requirements for 2022. And item 7C is an ordinance approving the release or the releasing the RTA's 2022 annual comprehensive financial report. John, good morning, and you can introduce our outstanding auditors as well.
Thank
It's all
you.
yours, John.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is John Yu, and I'm controller here at the RTA. I'll be going over two items regarding the proposed ordinances in approving RTA's 2022 financial statement. The first ordinance approves the 2022 annual comprehensive financial report. This report covers only the RTA reporting entity. The RTA Act and our bond covenants requires an audit of the annual comprehensive financials report. The second ordinance approves the 2022 combining financial report. This report represents the compilation of the financial result of the RTA and three service board. The RTA Act requires this report to be implemented in order to provide a holistic picture of the overall financial situation of the RTA system. Our external auditor do not audit these financial statements, but they do review them. Each service board auditors have issued an unmodified, which is clean opinion for their 2022 financial statements. Today, we are joined by the representatives of our auditing firm, RSM, to cover the topic required by auditing standard. Now, would you like to turn it over to our external auditor? Bill Sarb is a partner with the RSM and the lead partner on the RTA audit. RSM is the fifth largest CPA firm in the nation and has a specialty in serving government entities like the RTA. Bill has over 15 years of experience performing audit of government entities and has a significant experience with all aspects of government operations. Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Just want to thank everyone for having me here today. I'm very excited to be back in person. As much as it was nice to wear sweatpants and a suit coat and tie, I'm happy to be dressed the full part today. Next slide, please. As John mentioned, my name is Bill Sarb. I am a partner with RSM and the lead partner over the entire RTA audit. Quickly, I'll let Maria introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Maria Prado. I am the managing partner for Prado and Renteria CPAs, and we participate on the audit.
Two others I'd like to just shout out. One with me here today in the audience, Katie Rodriguez is the lead manager on the audit from RSM. She focuses her attention on the annual comprehensive financial report and assists with the special purpose compilation, as well as with the RTA pension. Also, Ronnie Christopher, who could not be here today, another manager on the audit. She assists with the federal compliance audit, as well as the standalone audit for the JSIF. Next slide, please. To remind everyone of the scope of services. So as the external auditor, RSM performs a full audit of the annual comprehensive financial report, specifically the financial section. In addition, we perform a compilation, which is not quite an audit, but a compilation under the standards of the special purpose combining report, as mentioned by John, which is the combination of the RTA as well as the three service boards' financial information. The Joint Self-Insurance Fund, or JSIF, is a standalone fund of the RTA, which we issue a standalone report and audit on its own. Also, the RTA Metro and PACE pension plan, we issue a standalone financial report for that. Finally, we're holding out the overall scope of what's included in the comprehensive report. The federal single audit is performed at the RTA level on following the uniform guidance put out by the federal government. Last but not least, we also perform the audit of the RTA 401k plan, which is separate from the overall financial statements. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I'm happy to be here today. It's a new way of doing business. We've all gone through a lot of changes the last several years. We've done a lot of things remotely since COVID hit, 3 years ago now, 3+ years. I'm happy to report that we've changed that a bit here in 2020 or for the 2022 audit in 2023. We've been doing a little bit more in person and we're kind of doing things more on a hybrid approach. We're not back to where we were. We're not here every day, but we are here and we're doing things in office as well as on site. And we're excited to be doing things that way as we think we've learned to be performing better audits by doing things that way and hopefully minimizing interruptions for staff. As part of our contract, our DBE goal is 12%. We partner with Prado and Renteria to meet that goal, and we are currently on track to continue to achieve it. Prado and Renteria has been partnering with us on this engagement for a long history, and they perform and help provide assistance with the federal compliance audit or the single audit, the pension audit, as well as the overall financial statement audit. Really, Prado and Maria's team is just a seamless part of our team. We do expect future assistance to be continue, and we are committed to provide with Prado the assistance on the 401k audit as well. Next slide, please. An external audit is a significant process. It takes a lot of communication and effort on both sides. Just want to once again thank everyone for their assistance in working through this year. One of the main reasons we believe we have success with this is by harnessing our technology and our improvements in the IT environment. One of those changes this year was implementing a new communication and file sharing system called Suralink, which is a secure portal that we use to essentially perform the entire audit with RTA and management and staff. All requests are built into the system and all communication flows through the system, which helps on both sides for tracking purposes on how management's doing in responding to us, as well as how we're doing in responding to what they've provided. It gives the full picture, which we really think is going to assist us in gaining better efficiencies moving forward. Next slide, please. As the external auditor, I do want to just remind of our responsibilities. Our responsibilities were described in our arrangement letter, which was provided to management and signed at the outset of the audit. Material misstatement over the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error, and to design our audit to respond to those risks. We obtained an understanding of the controls in place, and we designed our procedures to evaluate and perform testing over certain controls, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the overall control. We evaluated the appropriateness of the policies used and the reasonableness of estimates made. And based on our audit, we believe everything was done in accordance with the rules and without or nothing outside of reasonable to this point. And finally, we've concluded that based on the evidence gathered, there are no doubts about the RTA's overall ability to continue as a going concern for a reasonable period. Next slide, please. Some highlights from the annual comprehensive financial report. As Leanne mentioned during her presentation, kudos to the RTA and their staff. The RTA was awarded the GFOA certificate for excellence in financial reporting for the 28th consecutive year. And we're hopeful that they can go for 29 and then round up to 30 here shortly. Overall, the RTA, if in the big picture, does operate as a deficit, but that is not the whole story. That deficit is driven by the bonded debt of the RTA, which for the most part, the proceeds are passed to the service boards for overall capital improvements across the system. There was no new debt issued in fiscal year 2022, which resulted in an overall decrease to the net deficit at the end of the year. Within the general fund on the budget side, to recognize improving sales tax results, the RTA did have a budget amendment during the year, which increased both general fund revenue and expenditures by 30 million. In addition, on the revenue and expenditure side, overall, the budget was exceeded on both ends by $445 and $423 million respectively, largely due to additional state grant funding not included in the original budget. Next slide, please. the special purpose combining report. This report is required to be submitted to the state of Illinois by the RTA Act. As John mentioned, each individual service board receives an independent audit, and those audits are submitted to the RTA. The service board also submit and certify their final recovery ratio. In 2022, recovery ratios, as mentioned previously by Anthony, regarding the future, the recovery ratio penalties associated with the act were waived, and the statutory requirements were waived by Public Act 102-0678. Due to that, the region-wide recovery ratio ended up being 44.58% as a whole for 2020. The recovery ratio was 9.04%. Next slide, please. For the standalone audits of the Joint Self-Insurance Fund and the RTA pension plan, JSAF had a net position of 21.3 million as of the end of the fiscal year. During the year, the RTA distributed nearly 10 million from the general fund. These distributions were used to cover insurance premiums, which came in at 9.2 million during the year. On the pension plan side, the RTA pension plan includes the non-union employees of the RTA, Metra, and PACE. Combined employer contributions from those three entities was 24.7 million during 2022. As everyone knows, the financial markets have been extremely volatile over the last several years, specifically in 2022, and those markets had an effect on the overall pension plan's position. In 2022, or as of the year end, the portfolio lost $44.6 million in money, and their money weighted loss was around 12%. Again, that is not outside of the norm when comparing to the market benchmarks. It's unfortunate, but as a long-term investor, it should be something that can be rectified moving forward. This impact, or the investment loss had an impact on the market funded ratio of the plan, which decreased from 82% to 67.5% as of the end of 2022. However, for actuarial purposes, the ratio decreased from 74% to 73% in 2022. The differences between the market ratio and the actuarial ratio is due to the actuaries evaluating it on more of a long-term basis and building in a smoothing process to take out that extreme market volatility. Next slide, please. The overall results. We anticipate the issuance or have issued unmodified clean opinions over the following. JSAF, we issued a clean opinion at the end of March as required by statute, and that report was filed with the state. The RTA, Metra, and PACE pension plan should be finalized in the coming days. And the annual comprehensive financial report will be finalized hopefully before the end of the month. As of this point, there were no material weaknesses that were identified during our audits of any of these financial statements. Related to our risk-based approach, getting into the results on our specific risks, management override of controls and fraudulent revenue recognition are two presumed risks on all audits that RSM performs over any entity. In addition, the actuarial valuation of the net pension liability and the estimate for the valuation of investment portfolio is a significant risk that's identified specifically for the RTA and the RTA pension plan. We did specific testing over all of these areas with focused procedures, and we did not identify any material exceptions noteworthy or bringing up. Next slide, please. Maria is going to help with covering our federal compliance audit to date.
Thank you, Bill. On the federal compliance audit, also known as the single audit, the RTA reported total federal expenditures of 8.6 million in 2022. The federal programs include 4.4 million related to the federal transit cluster and 4.1 million related to the transit services program cluster. There were also 95,000 in remaining federal expenditures that were spread across several other programs, which are consistent with prior years. Based on the results of the expenditures in 2022, we determined that the federal transit cluster was the only required major program. We performed detailed testing procedures over the major program, and to date, we have not identified any instances of non-compliance. Procedures are ongoing. Back to you, Bill.
Thanks, Maria. Next slide, please. Accounting standards and changes. During fiscal year 2022, a significant new standard was on board and required to be implemented. This is statement number 87, as issued by GASB, over leases. No different than our non-governmental or the FASB world counterparts, the leasing requirements for reporting have been significantly changed for everyone. To summarize, what's occurred is the viewpoint from the accounting standard setters is that leases should be on the books. The impact of signing a lease should be recorded and reported based on the rules or the agreements that the lease is associated with. What happens or the result of this is a gross up of the financial statements, so the balance sheet. So when the RTA leases office space, the change here is that this office space becomes an asset to the RTA. It is a right to use asset. That's the terminology that's been approved. So the RTA reports and put on a right to use asset onto their books at the beginning of the year. Associated with signing the agreement to make those payments, there's also a lease liability. What happens is ultimately these amounts offset and are largely equal to one another. So increased assets, increased liabilities, impact on the bottom line is zero or very close to zero. To do so, you look at all the rules around that lease and you look at the term and you come up with what's called the incremental borrowing rate and you discount and present value it back and you put it on the books and we get into all the math and accounting lingo. And I don't need to go down that road, but for the RTA, management did a full assessment of all of their agreements. The main lease being the lease for the office space, and they did add that to their books and they did what they needed to do to implement the standard. So we applaud them for that. The standard was a little bit more significant for the service boards, given their operations. They also implemented the standard, and from what we can tell, everything looks good from that end. Going forward, other future standards, GASB statement number 96. I'll focus this mostly on this one, subscription-based information technology arrangements. So really what that means is these are software subscriptions, licenses, evaluating these as if they're leases. So the leasing standard carved IT arrangements out. This standard brings them in. So all organizations now need to look at all of their technology contracts, software arrangements, software license agreements, et cetera, and evaluate whether or not they meet the definition of something that needs to be put on the books. This standard is upcoming for the next fiscal year and will be significant for everyone who's operating really in all facets of government. The other three standards are moving forward and future looking and not as significant, so I won't go into them in detail, but happy to take questions if anyone has any. Next slide, please. Finally, just want to summarize our required communications. We did not identify any significant or unusual transactions during the year that were outside of the policies or outside of the general area which lacked guidance. To date, there were no audit adjustments made to the original trial balances presented to us to begin our audit, and we have not identified any uncorrected misstatements or past adjustments to date. Under GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles, management may elect among alternative accounting practices. We are not aware, or we believe that the accounting practices management has selected appear to be the preferable ones. There's nothing outside of the ordinary. Next slide, please. We did not encounter any significant disagreements with management when performing our procedures. We're not aware of management having any consultations with other accountants about accounting or auditing matters. There were no significant issues arising from the audit that were discussed with management or that were the subject of significant correspondence. And we did not have any significant difficulties in performing our procedures. Once all reports are issued, we will issue a formal report to the board, which includes any copies of any written communication between us and management during the process. To date, that is the arrangement letter and the management representation letter. That concludes my detailed presentation. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you. Director Andolcio.
In the investment strategy where you said 44.6 million was lost, 12% of that asset. Looking at today's times and the climate that we're in, new strategies for that particular investment is being looked at? Or you mentioned long-term, or is it just sitting?
So those numbers were specific to the pension plan.
Right.
Generally, from the pension plan perspective, you're looking at it from a long-term perspective. So the significant shifts and swings, I think if you look at those numbers as of today, things have improved and a lot of those losses have been gained back, although not dollar for dollar. So from at any given time, you're going to have significant swings. I think overall, the pension plan's investment policy and strategy have been relatively consistent with evaluating where things have gone and making changes where necessary based on the needs of the members. I wouldn't say that anything needs to be done based on the results as of 12/31 specifically.
Thank you.
Carrie.
First of all, thank you for the thoroughness of your report. Sounds like everything turned out the way it should be. I did have a question back on the slide about responsibility of external auditor as described in the arrangement letter. You talk about designing the process to just interact with the internal controls, but not to express any opinion on the effectiveness of RTA's internal controls. Is there another audit or time and place when you would express opinions on the internal controls?
Typically outside of SEC world, no. It is something that can be performed more as a consulting service, but under the AICPA standards and the government accountability standards or the GAGIS standards issued by the federal government, we are not being tasked or asked to perform a full internal controls audit.
Okay. Do we, and maybe this is for Leanne, do we ever do that?
Well, if you recall, we've done, and we've talked about with the board, a broader risk assessment across all facets of the
Okay.
organization. So, and that leads to, this is more on just the financial side, but there's
Okay.
all facets in that broader risk assessment that we did. I don't know last year was it, and we actually shared that with the board from the broader audit team, which can capture financial, but everything as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Lewis.
When you were describing significant risks in the audit, and we've been faced with a number of cybersecurity issues, I didn't hear you speak to it. I didn't know if that was not part of the scope of what you would look at or comment on, or how that was handled.
Cyber issues are definitely a risk for everyone at both all organizations as well as individuals as we go through life. It is a risk. Based on my understanding at this point, what has potentially occurred is subsequent or not during the period that we were auditing. So from that perspective, we evaluate things as they come up during the audit.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Any other questions? John, where are we at?
Thank you, Bill and Maria. At this time, the staff requests the board to consider these ordinances that approves the RTA's 2022 annual comprehensive financial report and the combined financial report with the certified RTA recovery ratio. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's, if we could, if there's no questions or comments further on 7B, I need a motion and a second. Director Melvin moves that we approve item 7B, seconded by Director Gathing. With that, Joy, will you please take a roll call?
Director Indulcio,
Aye.
Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson,
Aye.
Director Fuentes,
Aye.
Director Gathing,
Aye.
Director Gorman,
Aye.
Director Groven,
Aye.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Director Cattell,
Aye.
Director Lewis,
Yes.
Director Melvin,
Yes.
Dr. Pang,
Yes.
and Dr. Ross,
Yes.
and Chairman Dillard.
Yes. And seven B is approved. Let's do seven C, same request, motion in a second. Director Gathing moves, we approve seven C, seconded by Director Melvin, and with that, Madam Secretary, let's have a roll call.
Director Indulcio,
Aye.
Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson,
Aye.
Dr. Fuentes,
Aye.
Dr. Gathing,
Aye.
Dr. Groven, Dr. Gorman, sorry. Aye. Dr. Groven,
Aye.
Dr. Holt,
Yes.
Dr. Cattell,
Aye.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes.
Dr. Melvin.
Yes.
Dr. Pang.
Yes.
Dr. Ross.
Yes.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes,
14
thank you.
ayes.
Seven C is approved. John and the auditors, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I think we can address the following agenda items at the same time as they appear on the board agenda. The items for consideration would include seven D, and that's an ordinance amending the contract integrated graphic design and on-demand services. Item seven E is an ordinance authorizing renewals for ERP software subscriptions and related services. Seven F is the approval of travel expenses. If there are any comments or questions on these, Tina Fast Smith is available for questions on the graphic design and on-demand services, and Jerry Thambali is here for seven E on the EFP or ERP software subscriptions. Any questions on any of those? If not, how about a motion and a second? We approve seven D, seven E, seven F. Director Cotel moves, seconded by Director Gorman, that we approve seven D, seven E, and seven F. Joey, why don't you take a roll call on that one as well?
Sure. Director Indulcio.
Aye.
Dr. Carey.
Aye.
Dr. Colson.
Aye.
Dr. Fuentes.
Aye.
Dr. Gathing.
Aye.
Dr. Gorman. Aye. Dr. Groven.
Aye.
Dr. Holt.
Yes.
Dr. Cattell.
Aye.
Dr. Lewis. Dr. Melvin.
Yes.
Dr. Pang.
Yes.
And Dr. Ross.
Yes.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes. And those are approved. Thank you very much. Item eight is new business. Any new business to come before us today? If not, I want to remind everybody that our next meeting will be July 20th at 2023. And before we adjourn, we'll have our legal counsel, Allison, come up and read an exception as we want to move into executive session. I don't believe we have to come back. Is that correct? We can
That is
really
correct,
adjourn the
yeah.
big meeting and go to executive session?
Yep, that's correct. So pursuant to subsections two C8 and two C11 of the Open Meetings Act, the board may now vote to move into and adjourn from executive session for discussion of a security matter and potential litigation.
Great, thank you. So with that, we need a motion in a second to resolve ourselves into executive session. Director Holt moves, seconded by Director Carey, that we will go to executive session. And with that, Joey, take a motion to on the full adjournment of the full board, and then we'll go into executive session by voice vote, I think, after that.
Please do.
So
Sorry, I've done these before.
to adjourn.
Okay, Joey's do a roll.
In fact, no,
Yeah, we
let's
just
do
do
this.
voice
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And we will go into executive session as the legal counsel indicated.